Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
Welcome in, listeners, to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast. We're always talking everything college hoops. You could have been anywhere else on the dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus. We appreciate that. Along with the ride today, we have Nathan Shoup of the Reno Slant podcast. Please give Nathan a follow at Shoup Nathan, capital S, capital N. And of course, follow the podcast at the Reno Slant. Nathan, thank you for catching us up on all things Reno.
I appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to talking some shop here.
All right, Nathan, let's just jump into last season. Last season for the Wolfpack, it was like a new start line on multiple fronts. We have Coach Alford. We have a lack of the transfer train that was the must bus. So catch up, listeners, to help them understand the transition to Coach Alford and maybe some of those special moments and special events that last season did hold for the Wolfpack.
Yeah, I mean, it was Alford's second year last year. Taking over for Muss. Year one, you had Jalen Harris there, and there was hopes that with Jalen Harris they could still get to the NCAA tournament, and then they had an okay year. I think they went 19-12, and they got bounced by Wyoming in the first round I think Wyoming was a 7 seed. It was definitely a frustrating finish 2 years ago. Last year, lowest expectations for Nevada hoops, maybe since Muss's first year. Picked to finish 6th in the preseason poll, end up finishing 5th. They get a first round bye in the Mountain West Conference tournament. And that was, from my perspective, a big time win for them last year. They finished the year 16-10, 10-7. Last year was all about developing players and getting them really ready for this year. It's the reason I'm on the podcast. It's a really anticipated season.
Right.
And they did that last year. They brought guys along, namely Grant Sherfield, who just went bonkers.
Yep.
Now he's a legitimate Mountain West Player of the Year candidate. We also saw guys like Warren Washington, 7-foot big from Oregon State, really come along. KJ Himes really starting to come along as well. If you look at most memorable moments, there's maybe two of them, and they were later in the year. If it's not beating Boise in the Mountain West tourney quarterfinals to get to the semifinals, it had to be a week prior. Nevada was coming off its COVID break. I don't know if calling it a break is a good way to describe it, but they were off with COVID for a little bit. And the question mark was, are they going to be able to get it together? Because they were playing pretty well before the COVID break. And they had Colorado State at home. Colorado State was playing for its NCAA tournament life. And Grant had a dagger in their eye with less than a second left to win 85-82. So Nevada went into the Mountain West Conference tournament feeling a lot better about things. I mean, I would go to really, if not that shot, and Grant hit a number of big shots last year. I would just say his development last year into now someone who we're hoping is going to lead an NCAA tournament team is what you really look forward to this year. I mean, he averaged almost 19 points per game, shot 43% from the field, 37% from deep. He facilitated the offense, had over six assists per game. We knew he was going to be good. I don't think any of us knew he was going to be that good.
Agreed. Grant just totally blew up, like you mentioned. I think you used the word bonkers. The fact that he was such an amazing late shot maker, and they put the ball in his hands and just let him cook, and he absolutely delivered on multiple occasions, not just in that one highlight that you put out right there. So one of the things that you mentioned were the COVID challenges and the COVID break, quote unquote, that you called it. And when we talked to, Chris Solari from Michigan State, he mentioned a very similar challenge where the team was playing well. They came back, things looked out of sorts, and then they caught a little bit, they looked kind of normal, quote unquote.
Right. So
what were some of the challenges that Nevada faced last year with COVID, specifically to the Mountain West and specifically to, your squad?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the athletic department as a whole, at least for the major sports, football did really well last year. They didn't miss a single game, which is a little bit fortunate. One, they got to take care of their own things, but it can happen to another team they're playing, and they just lucked out that every other team also didn't have any issues the week they were playing, at least. Basketball was rolling pretty well. In addition to that, they're keeping it going, and we kind of took it for granted. So when Nevada had its COVID case, you're like, what? We haven't had it all year. And then it was frustrating, and you recognize, oh my God, we're in a pandemic still. So Nevada went to Wyoming earlier in the year and got swept. They had the Mountain West had a 2-game series last year. And it was a really frustrating 2-game sweep for Nevada. Then they came home and they had basically 4 home games. They had 2 versus UNLV, 2 versus Boise State, and they swept all 4 games. They hammered UNLV. They took 2 from Boise. Boise was a bubble team at that point, NCAA tournament contending team. And that was the best the team had been playing all year. And it was right after that Boise sweep when the positive cases started happening. And then they had to basically sit out 3 weeks. They had a series at San Jose State get wiped out. They had a series versus Colorado State get wiped out. And then their first games back, they went to Utah State. And that did not go well. I mean, the first game they were competitive. I think they lost by 3. It was a 1-possession, 2-possession game. And then game 2, they just got blitzed. Got obliterated in that game. All out of sorts. Definitely not the same team we saw pre-pandemic. And then they come home, or then after the Utah State series, they come home, wait a week because they had a San Jose State game they tried to make up. They got wiped out again. And then they played that Colorado State game and with Grant's 3 at the buzzer to win by 3 going into the Mountain West tournament.
I mean, he was insane last year, but you outlined like some of the challenges that your program specifically had, but also, multiple programs around the country had that same, the break. Can we get our groove back? Can we get back into some sort of rhythm? And it just seemed like there was no right answer for it at any point. All right, Nathan, let's get into the transfer portal. Nevada is rich in the transfer portal success. Let the listeners know some of the successes on the never-ending roller coaster that is the transfer portal. I mean, it just seems like there's not anything that's going to let up here. So what is going to happen this particular season with a couple of the newbies and new faces that we might see in uniform?
Nevada didn't invent the transfers. I feel like Mush should get some royalties on the transfer portal or something, though, because he for sure made it in vogue.
He needs a percentage, right?
You would think. And so now it's pretty much every program has an active offseason when it comes to transfers, and Nevada is no different. Basically, Nevada lost 4 guys from last year's team. It lost Zane Meeks, who was a stud last year. He had a falling out with the coaching staff, kind of weird way. He ended up leaving the program. From what I've gathered, disagreement about an injury. Zane's personal doctors, the team doctors. That's what I've come to understand. No longer on the team. He was the biggest contributor the team lost from last year. The team also lost Kane Milling, who played in the backcourt. Also lost Robbie Robinson, who played in the backcourt. And then there was Addison Patterson, who was the Oregon transfer coming in, who everyone was all fired up about. When he committed to Nevada, he was at the time the highest ranked recruit who had ever come to Nevada, and he left the team in the offseason. So there are the 4 names who leave this year. Coming in this year, you have Keenan Blackshear, 6'6" guard from Florida Atlantic. He has 3 years of eligibility left. He went from just around 3 points per game as a freshman to almost 9 points per game as a sophomore. He's more of a small guard than a point guard, but he's going to get some minutes in the backcourt for certain. Will Baker is a name that those who follow college basketball recruiting hard will recognize. 7-footer, committed to Texas. He was the number 28 overall prospect in the country coming out, depending on which list you looked at.
Right.
Had a rough freshman year at Texas. 23 games, ended up transferring out the middle of last year. Got 3 years of eligibility left. Really struggled at Texas. 2 points per game, almost 8 minutes per game. In high school, he was someone who could really stretch the floor at 7 feet, could really stroke it, and just didn't do that at Texas at all. And Steve Alford has commented a couple different times over the offseason that his strokes look a little bit better in practice. It's practice. Make of that what you will. I am in serious wait-and-see mode with Will Baker, but a lot of people in Reno are really fired up to see him at Lawler this winter. And then the name that is going to make the biggest splash this year is A.J. Brahma. 6'7" small forward from Robert Morris. Extremely efficient last year. He's a one-and-done transfer, so this is last year of eligibility. He's a 21-10 guy, Robert Morris. Big-time defender. He'll step into a starting role immediately. I think the easy comp is to compare him with Jordan Caroline, and that's maybe a little bit unfair, but that's kind of the role I think Nevada fans are excited about him potentially playing. He took a bananas route to get to Nevada. transferring from Robert
did.
Morris. He was flirting with Nevada, and depending on who you ask, it was all right, he's coming. Then apparently he didn't have the grades, so then he went to Arizona State. Nevada still had a spot open, so Nevada brought in Trey Wade, the Wichita State transfer. Trey was at Nevada for, I think, 2 weeks, and then it had a family matter, asked to be released, so he gets released. I forget where it's somewhere further on the East Coast. I don't remember exactly where he went. So a spot opens back up. Brahma, it was Brahma, excuse me, figured out something with his grades. I don't know if he passed his finals or what, but the spot was open again. He asked for his release from Arizona State, and now he ends up at Nevada. So ultimately, Steve Alford got his guy, but it was pretty fun following the theatrics, his path to Nevada.
We mentioned it's a roller coaster ride, and he definitely was like at the front seat of that. That's for sure. And I think another comparison, just to go like, maybe one class back, we can recall Cam Oliver like that. I know he's not as explosive as Cam, because Cam could jump out of the gym and dunk on anybody, but like that basket getting, difference making, kind of like, wrecking, a bullet in Chinese shop, like a wrecking ball type offensive player that can also reap dividends on the defensive end with his defensive rebounding prowess. I'm a fan, and I think he definitely could fit into that category, but you're right. If you're mentioning Jordan Caroline and comparing somebody to that, I mean, Reno fans know that is high praise right there for sure. All right, so let's talk about the returners a little bit. I mean, you mentioned Grant. You also have high IQ Desmond Cambridge from Brown.
Yep.
You have one of the best backcourts, not just in your conference, but one of the most underrated backcourts in the nation with those two players. So talk about the returners and what Steve Alford is going to trust. What is he going to trust those guys to do, and maybe some of the other returners as well?
I think the backcourt is probably the biggest reason Nevada has the aspirations that it does this year and is getting as much love as it is. We've talked about Grant already. Dez was a third-team Mountain West pick last year. You bring in Blackshear. Daniel Foster was a freshman last year, missed his first 15 games last year with a shoulder injury, then ended up starting 8 of the final 11 games of the year. Steve Alford really likes him. You have Alem Hussenovich, who was a freshman last year, played in 21 games, hit a couple big shots in a couple games. So not only do you have some really talented dudes at the top, you got some depth that you can go to there as well. And then if you look in the front court, Warren Washington, who the listeners to our podcast are probably tired of hearing me talk about him, but he's probably the guy I'm most excited about, just because he's such an athletic specimen. He'll make some moves where you look at that and you're just like, a 7-footer is not supposed to do that. And he was starting to really figure out some things on both ends of the floor last year. You bring in Will Baker. Again, we'll see what happens with him this year. KJ Himes, someone who's really started to develop with Steve Alford. You throw in AJ Brahma in there.
Right.
And then Trey Coleman got a ton of minutes as a freshman last year as a small forward. So you have a lot of really talented dudes, and you got some depth cooked in there as well. A couple freshmen coming in this year that I don't think we'll see a ton of. Jalen Weaver, top recruit out of Colorado last year, listed at 6'4", 185, big guard. He's an athlete. But again, you mentioned the guys, or we talk about the guys in the backcourt. He's going to have to really work to get into the rotation. The other the freshman coming is Nick Davidson out of Southern California, 6'8" kid, went to Mater Dei, had a bunch of national offers, but he's a family Nevada guy. His dad played hoops at Nevada. His mom played volleyball. And again, then you look at the front court. We already talked about. I list all those names off. Yeah. I'm not expecting to see a lot of those guys this year, just given the depth that Nevada has.
It seems like practice might be an adventure, and that that scout team might actually be pretty decent and get some points on that first team. That's what it seems like. All right, so let's talk about inside the conference. I mean, this is one of the conferences that's going to be a multi-bid conference, and rightly so. It's loaded. Colorado State is incredible. San Diego State is always an issue. Boise, as you mentioned, they were on the bubble last year, and the talent is always rich right there. New Mexico has something cooking with Patino. What is going to be the matchup that you think Nevada is going to pay attention to see, like, okay, yeah, this is real. It's real in Reno this year. We're gonna make some noise.
Yeah. I think on paper, you look at it now and it's Colorado State. They're going to enter the season as the favorites to win the conference. But if you look around the rest of the Mountain West, part of the reason there's so much hope in Reno this year is not only the talent this group has come back and some of the new talent coming in, but the Mountain West did lose a fair share last year. San Diego State loses Matt Mitchell, Mountain West Player of the Year. Jordan Shackle is gone. They do get Cal transfer Matt Bradley, though. He's gonna be big time for them. Yeah. Over 18 points per game for the Golden Bears last year at Cal. Boise State loses Derek Alston. He's all conference guy. He was a Mountain West Player of the Year candidate. Utah State loses Coach Craig Smith. He's off to Utah. Kata's gone as well. Colorado State, we already mentioned, they bring back both David Roddy and Isaiah Stevens. They're the team to beat in the conference right now. So I think on paper, you say it's Colorado State. You play the Rams twice in a 2-week stretch in late January, early February. The answer is San Diego State, though, because the Aztecs have owned the pack. Since Nevada's joined the Mountain West, Nevada is 3-17 for San Diego State. 0-4 in the Mountain West Conference tournament. Nevada's never won at Viejas as a Mountain West member. They did play 2 competitive games down there last year, but 0-8 for San Diego State as a Mountain West member. So if Nevada is going to take kind of that step forward this year, yes, got to beat Colorado State, but if they could find a way to beat San Diego State or beat San Diego State in the Mountain West tournament, it would be cathartic for this team and this fan base to get past that group.
Those Aztecs, they definitely have a spell over Nevada. I mean, they have had a great program going, for a bit here. And now, you mentioned those numbers. I did not have any idea the numbers were that lopsided. Holy smokes. All right. If you want to go off here, please do, because we both took a look at this. And I mean, you can say what your result was, but I'm going to use the term uninspired. How's that? Take a look at the non-conference schedule. And even though you are going to have one of the finest backcourts in the nation, and you have trusted, veterans coming back, what are we doing with this non-conference schedule, and where are the opportunities? So, Nathan, enlighten us, please. Where does your opinion stand?
You are asking the same question the entire fan base saw when the schedule came out officially or was officially released. And you also obviously saw games being leaked, leading up to the official reveal, if you will. And even at that point, people who are in the Nevada Hoops Twitter circles were looking around saying, what in the hell is going on right now? So I did prepare a little bit here. And here's Nevada's non-conference schedule for everyone listening at home. Versus Eastern Washington, versus San Diego, at Santa Clara, at San Francisco. They got one MTE. They're going to go play at the Pentagon in South Dakota. I did not know there was a Pentagon in South Dakota, but there is. They're going to play South Dakota State, Washington, and George Mason. Then after that, they're going to play Pepperdine at home. They're going to go to North Texas. They're going to go to Texas Arlington. They're going to host UMD. We all did Google around and figure out what the hell UMD is. It's Minnesota Duluth. It's Division II school. Then they're going to play Loyola Marymount, and they're going to wrap up non-conference versus Grand Canyon. Is anyone inspired? They got 5 West Coast Conference teams in there. No Gonzaga, no St. Mary's, no BYU. This is not the schedule you build if you're building up to earn an at-large berth. And it feels like, so much can change, obviously, between now and November and then into March. But it just feels like, looking at the schedule, that Nevada's going to have to win 3 straight games in Vegas in the Mountain West Conference tournament to grab an auto bid. And you hope Colorado State can get ranked this year. You hope San Diego State can do its thing. You hope Boise can stay up there, and you maybe get some really good chances in conference play. But man, it's gonna be tough to pick up some marquee wins in non-conference play. And Steve Alford did get a fair amount of questions about this.
Right.
You're trying to put a non-conference schedule together during a pandemic, which does cause some problems. They had to give some return games that they weren't able to play this year, so that minimized the number of slots you can fill. However, Nevada's not the only Mountain West team, or mid-major, if you will, who is in that situation. And you see other schools around the Mountain West who are able to get some big games on their schedule. Money is always a consideration at a school like Nevada. Correct. Nevada typically spends around $200,000 on its non-conference schedule. It spent $50,000 this year. UMD, Minnesota Duluth alone costs $40,000. And the connection there is Steve Alford coached with UMD's coach when he was at Iowa, and Steve Alford likes to take care of his guys. But man, you spend $50,000 on a non-conference schedule, it stinks when you got a legit NCAA tournament aspirations, and $40,000 of that goes to a Division II school. You're going way over market value to get a Division II school to come to Reno. And shout out, by the way, to need to give some love here to Chris Murray, Nevada Sportsnet. He foiled all those numbers, which provides some perspective. When those numbers came out, I think that kind of opened the can a little bit even more. People are like, what in the hell is going on? So if it's not money, and if it's not, yes, the pandemic was a factor, but other Mountain West teams were able to put a schedule together. What was it? Right. And that's the question. What's the holdup, and how are you going to really justify this schedule? Because he's put a couple quotes out there that, yeah, we're happy with the schedule. And it's like, we would rather you just say, we know it's not very good and we apologize and we'll make the most of it. Don't tell us this is a great non-conference schedule, because it's not. And it just feels like, man, it's going to really come down to those 3 days in Vegas, the Mountain West Conference tournament, which is unfortunate, because this is a loaded team that's in a position to hopefully make a run, and you never know what can happen in 40 minutes.
This is correct. That's why they play the games. And I mean, we're putting a lot of eggs in the North Texas basket as far as their NCAA win last year in the first round as an upset. I mean, what are we even doing here? And you know, the first thing that popped to my mind when you gave me the rundown is like a traditional, maybe if we go back like 3 or 4 seasons for St. Mary's, and they would always receive grief on their non-conference scheduling. And then they would build up the 17-1 record and go in to WCC play, and then hope to grab one of those games against Gonzaga, like you mentioned them earlier, and then that was the blueprint for them. So I don't know if Coach Alford is hoping to copycat that, but I don't think there's a Gonzaga sitting inside your conference where they can get that big signature win. I mean, of course, Colorado State's going to be great. You mentioned, how powerful that San Diego State and the Aztecs are going to be. And, we mentioned Boise, but at the same point, like there's not that like top 5 team there. So I agree. I think that there's something maybe we'll use the word lacking. How's that?
I think it's an appropriate phrase for it. And I don't know, granted, I don't follow it as closely as others. I don't know if the net is as easy to cook as the RPI was. Like, that's what St. Mary's, they had the formula down. They could kind of cook it and get a high number. I don't know if the net is as easy to maneuver. And you have the quadrants, and there's not a single, maybe a quad 1 game or 2, depending on what Colorado State and San Diego State can do. There certainly isn't one in the non-conference schedule. And you mentioned no Gonzaga in the conference, at least not yet. Those of us who are following this closely, obviously we're all talking realignment right now, are about to go knock on Craig Thompson's door, commissioner of the Mountain West, and be like, if you haven't been blitzing Gonzaga right now with BYU bouncing to the Big 12, you are asleep at the wheel, my friend. And I mean, from Gonzaga's perspective, what do you really got in the West Coast Conference now with BYU getting to go? You got St. Mary's. You obviously can schedule whatever you want in non-conference, and you can say, hey, we got San Diego State, which is always a program. Colorado State is going to stick around. It sounds like they flirted with the American. Nevada has made a splash as of late. That is a bigger, I would think, a better top-line group than what the West Coast Conference has right now with BYU leaving. That's the pitch.
I agree with the departure of BYU. I mean, you want to sell that San Francisco is on the way up. I get it. That makes sense. But at the same point, it makes perfect sense. And it also gives them a nice parachute out. Like I can still remember that there was, rumblings that the Big East was going to invite them because they're a basketball only school. I mean, that just makes no sense logistically, but your platform, I think it makes a little sense. I like it.
And geographically, they're not flying to the East Coast. I mean, they're in the footprint, essentially. They'd be by far the most northern school, but they're in that footprint.
Correct. All right, Nathan, amazing breakdown for the Wolfpack in Nevada, and of course, other things as well. Please give Nathan a follow at Shoup, Nathan, Shoup, capital N for Nathan, on Twitter. Please don't forget to give his excellent podcast, The Reno Slant, a little follow as well at The Reno Slant. Nathan, let's get you out of here on this. if you had to predict, I mean, you gave your prediction of what you think needs to happen. What do you think will happen with this team this year?
Oh man, predicting college basketball game to game is hard enough, let alone predicting what's going to happen over the course of the season starting in October. Man, I would love to sit here and say I feel really good about this team having an awesome year, hopefully winning, 24, 25 games. That's what they're going to hope to do this year, just stack up wins with the schedule, roll into the conference tournament, find a way to win 3 straight, get past San Diego State, go to the NCAA tournament. I mean, I really think best case scenario for this team is they get in the NCAA tournament. They maybe get in that 11-6, 12-5 game.
Sure.
And maybe find a way to win a game or two and maybe find a way to sneak into that second weekend, because that is the goal for this team. It's to get to the NCAA tournament. I think anything short of an NCAA tournament berth would be frustrating for this staff. It'd be frustrating for these players. It would be very frustrating for this fan base, which got used to going to the NCAA tournament, the 04 through 07 originally. Then Musk came in and brought it back and has no illusions of falling back into purgatory of college basketball where you're on the bubble of, getting an NIT berth. So that's the goal for this team for certain. If they don't make it, that would be a frustration for a lot of people. And that is, again, a reason why so many people are frustrated with this non-conference schedule, because it really narrows that margin for error for this group.
And I don't know, maybe they're trying to follow, like you said, that somebody's going to try to cook up the net. Maybe they're trying to follow the Colgate model. Like, I feel like Colgate cooked it up for a little while and was atop the net for a little while. Maybe Coach Alford knows something that we don't know about that equation. All right, Nathan, thank you so much for helping us out here, and thank you so much for spreading some knowledge for basketball out on the West Coast. We love staying up late to watch your game, so we're looking forward to that this season. And Nathan, thank you so much. We're please spread some kindness and some thanks Nathan's way, and give him a follow over on Twitter and tune in to the Reno Slant. Nathan, thank you so much, man.
You got it, Gus. Anytime, my bro.
All right, cheers. Cilantro, grazie, everybody.
Cozy in the candlelight.